All right. Welcome everybody to the Mission Historical Museum. Just a couple reminders. Our hours are every Tuesday to Friday from 1 to 4 p.m. and we're open every second Saturday of the month. We're going to have our lecture series same second Saturday of every month. From February and March are our next dates. So we'd love to see you guys there again if you could come. And I think that's pretty much it. This is Nick Morales. He's going to teach you a bit about archaeology.
And artifacts.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. As you mentioned, my name is Nick Morales. I'm retired from the University of Texas Pan American. Well, no, I wasn't there during Pan Am college days. However, I did have some classes in the old buildings. Nonetheless, I'm a student of geology. That's my primary field of study. But I didn't do geology at the university. I worked with computing. I have an aptitude for computers. So my career was at the university with computers. However, I never lost my link or the connection with the geology department. And then once I retired from the university, I started looking for other things to do. And one of the things I found was hunting for artifacts, researching artifacts, researching the people that lived in this area, and that really got my interest. My presentation today is about archaeology in South Texas, but it's also about how the ancients, as I like to call them, I don't like to call them American Indians or Indians, because that denotes what Christopher Columbus called the people he found on the New World. But that's not actually what he called them. In his journals, when they landed in the New World, he found that the people here were very kind-hearted, very willing to help anyone. So in his journals, he called them gente de Dios. De Dios then is Indians, or gente en Dios, with God. Anyway, that's how one interpretation of how the American Indians became called Indians. Nowadays, it's not quite as fashionable to refer to them as Indians or Southwest dwellers or whatever their tribe's name. I like to just generalize everyone, including those in northern Mexico, as just the ancients. So that's what I'll try to use. Nonetheless, I'll always revert to my upbringing and say cowboys and Indians. The other thing I will not do is I will try not to place what I have found as I, because it really is a joint effort by a lot of collectors who have helped me in my efforts to understand what the ancients were like, how they lived, where they lived, who they were. Even though they had no written language, I try to interpret what they were like, what they did by their stone tools that they left behind. And in that is where my geology comes in. I am able to identify the rock types, what rocks they used, and why they used them. Nonetheless, we'll start up. And I want to start by giving you a small geology lecture. Let's see. Pointer.
I want a copy of that map. Where is that from?
This is a map from Dr. Juan Gonzalez's field work. And
It's a great map.
yes, and I don't see how the pointer is working. Maybe this button? Yeah, okay. All right. So we'll start at the coast with the most recent sediments. And these sediments, or the material, has come down from the Rio Grande River and boundaried both the width of the river in both ancient times and current times. So that is known as the Holocene. So that's 20,000 years to present. How long have the ancients lived here? 20,000, maybe longer, 20,000 years. So they were actually here when these sediments originally were deposited, but they also were here 30 miles out to the Gulf of Mexico, because during that time, the Gulf of Mexico was further out. And then the ocean came back up, and this is our current coastline. So there are actually artifacts and campsites down in here, and occasionally you'll have things wash up on shore from those old campsites. Of course, most of them are buried by sediment, but there's a lot to be said about doing underwater archaeology here in South Texas. Next, we have this Beaumont, which is a clay, and a lot of people that we know of, we all live in that Beaumont, so you know what it looks like. Following that is older material called Lizzie, right in here, and it's really important because Mission and Rio Grande City fall in this Lizzie material, as well as the Catahoula, and that's very important because it contains an ancient volcanic ash, and the volcanic ash has influenced what kind of rocks are in the area, mainly petrified wood and the El Sauz Chert, which I'll talk about. And finally, we'll get back out here where it's really somewhat mountainous, and this is where a lot of the groups of ancients lived, and they were not a tribe. The term Coahuiltec or Coahuiltecans is a generalized term that denotes all of the Indians in northern Mexico. I will show where some of the individual groups, either family groups that lived together and moved together, or they were groups for protection or for hunting, for surviving. And these are their relative years. So they live in sediment down here that's 30 million years or older. And I mention that because I want you to understand that one age period. Okay. Because of this one, not artifact, but it probably is an artifact because it was found, sorry, and I don't want to use the word I because then I start being the mariachi, I. So it was found in a campsite there in that 30 million year old sediment. Well, if you remember anything about your geologic history, dinosaurs weren't around at that time. Dinosaurs died out 60 plus million years ago. So this cannot be a dinosaur egg. And while I was at the university, I did teach geology labs, and students quite often would bring these nice little round rocks that they had found and say, oh, look, I found a dinosaur egg. And I'd look at it and say, well, where did you find it? Oh, I found it over by Roma or Rio Grande City. And I said, well, it can't be a dinosaur egg. Oh, but it looks like it. Yes, it may look like it, but it's just not old enough to have been laid there and then resurrected because of erosion. Just a side note, if you ever find a nice round sandy looking rock that you think, oh, I found a dinosaur egg. But the answer is no. This is real curious because of the surface features. And the amateur archaeologist I was with, when I found that, he said, hey, that's a golf ball. So we called that site the golf ball site. Anyway, El Sauz Chert. I mentioned that a little while ago when I talked about the volcanic ash that is found in and around Rio Grande City, but even more than that, it's found in that same general location of the valley, including down South Mexico about 30 miles, and extends all the way up to past Three Rivers. I have an example of the Catahoula ash here, and you can see that. The ash has formed this cherty material, big mound of cherty material, that the ancients used to visit and quarry for not only arrowheads, but spear points and other tools. And I have an example of one here too. It's really very unique. Here are two of our university professors when we went to explore or explore that area. Going back to the map, and we talk about lithic materials, the rock that these ancients used to make their tools, at least the tools that have survived. They had plenty of other tools, but none of them have survived in our environment. A lot of this comes down from the Rio Grande all the way down, and then from northern Mexico down the Rio Grande, and finally is deposited in gravel layers throughout South Texas. If you ever drive toward or past La Jolla, you'll see those giant gravel pits. That's where all that gravel comes from, all of this. So the material that was available to them came from many sources, and a lot of it's almost impossible to find out where it came from. Now I have several examples of the different kinds of material. So let's look at some of those. We have quartz in the form of agate, chert, chalcedony, and flint. Most of you are familiar with flint, but it's just a type of quartz. It's also jasper, petrified wood, petrified palm. That is also a variety of quartz. A dirty quartz, and that has some features that you can identify as being old palm and old tree. And I have examples of artifacts, spear points that are made out of petrified wood and petrified palm. Chert, agate, petrified palm, rhyolite, which is a volcanic rock that has its origins in West Texas, out by Big Bend. There's a lot of rhyolite there, and that rhyolite probably made it from there, although it could have come from northern Mexico as well. And bone. I've only been able to locate one piece of bone artifact out in the field for the last few years, and that is questionable too. Non-lithic materials. They were also using tools that were other than rock. They used bone, teeth, antler, wood, shell for both fresh water, and iron of all things. But when did iron arrive in the New World? With the conquistadores. And the ancients soon adopted pieces of armor to make their own projectile points. So I do say that South Texas and northern Mexico's environment does not lead to the preservation of non-lithic material other than iron. There are iron spear points and arrowheads that have been found, primarily in the Mier area, unknown why. Okay, any questions at this point about the type of rocks that the artifacts are made out of? Well, why did they use those type of rocks? It should be a question. They're hard, they're durable, they're easily broken, chipped, knapped, and made into tools. And sharp once you cut them. Okay, so let me go into the anthropology, which is the study of the beings and their ancestors through time and space, and how they related to each other. This is about the peoples of South Texas, the natural history of them, the regional history, and the climate conditions where they lived. We'll look at a regular map. Okay, Matamoros, Brownsville, Harlingen, Mercedes, Reynosa, Old Reynosa. A lot of you may not realize that the town Reynosa, which was actually Reynosa, what was the other? Not Huevo, but anyway, it was upstream quite a bit until a flood devastated the little settlement, so they moved it down to where it is now, up on a higher bluff. Rio Grande City, where a lot of artifacts have been found. Ciudad Mier, San Miguel and Allende and Roma right in there, and then Falcon and all this. There's Zapata up here. Rio Salado is rich in artifacts. I wish I could go there and collect, but probably would be detrimental to my health. Good. Artifacts are everywhere, not just up there south. Artifacts are found in McAllen. Artifacts are found on the beach. Artifacts are everywhere. So one question that was posed to me a long time ago was this. You find artifacts just on the surface. Well, how many are there? How many artifacts are? How many dart points? How many spear points? How many scrapers? How many knives? How many arrowheads? My theory is this, or my account is this. If one ancient lost one artifact, let's say every month, being somewhat conservative, and they've lived here for over 20,000 years, and if they lost one in 1 acre, and there are millions of acres here, how many artifacts are out there? So just go out and you can find them. But you need to look what to look for. Okay. We know by the largest or some of the most common or most rare arrowheads or spear points, the Clovis, that people lived in the desert southwest and probably down in this area for 13,000 years. But just recently, a new find in North Texas predates Clovis as having stone tools, 16,000 years. So the evidence suggests that ancients lived here for at least that long, if not longer.
What evidence is there that can actually be dated with any reasonable certainty that people have been down here that long?
What accounts for it? Or
Yeah, other than just, well, there's some up in Salado, I think that area was.
the tools.
So they found tools they can date back there?
The tools are identified by type. If you find one type here, and you found and it was a Clovis point, and you found a Clovis point in Clovis, New Mexico, then you know that was about the same age, same time. And since there are tools that predate Clovis, then we know that they're much older than that, although we don't know specifically how old. However, there's still archaeology being done, digs being done, and those dates can change. What is the need of archaeology? It is to preserve. I preserve what is found. I document, and I try to relate that information to others that are both similar minded or just researchers. So that's the important thing. Is anytime you pick up something or anytime you dig up something, you disturb it, and then its history cannot be replaced. But if you document where you found it, what it is, when you found it, then at least there's some record of it. One of the items that I particularly am fond of doing is photographing people's collections. Grandfathers, fathers have collected arrowheads and for many years, and somebody has those collections. When I find someone who has, I ask if I can come photograph them so that I can preserve what has been found. Because once that last person has died, those collections can be lost, and no one knows where they came from. You'll see, I have some, I create individual collections, CDs or DVDs for them. And then I turn that over to the university, as well as some other researchers of the area. Just in case they look for something, so there's the point that I need, they can go back and know who it belongs to. So, archaeology has a big appeal to a lot of people. Just think about the archaeology of Egypt. Hundreds and thousands of people, millions of people go to Egypt just to see the archaeology, see what people lived like well before us. South Texas hasn't been the semi-arid area that we know of today. During the last pluvial period, or the big heavy rain, when the last ice age changed, this area had floods, huge rivers. The Rio Grande River was 20 times as wide as it is now. And that's how it carried all these rocks and stones and dumped them in South Texas and throughout. Sea level rose from 30 miles away. Coastal sites had been flooded. Variation changed, the vegetation changed from lush wetlands to dry brushlands as it is now. And then in the last 500 years, when Spanish colonized northern Mexico, South Texas, that changed the entire system. So how did these people, before the ancients or before the Spaniards got here, how did they live? So the Coahuiltecans were given a name for a consolidation of all of the tribes, of all of the groups, of all of the bands. And then some of them now have been started to be separated out because of individual linguistic characteristics or the areas in which they lived. So yes, you can use the word Coahuiltecan just to describe everyone, but I will bring you to view some of the actual Indian names that were here before and those that were given to them by the Spaniards. 224 tribes or groups or family bands, whatever you want to call them. Where did they live? Remember this map? Okay. Along the coast were some Apakes, and that's the actual Indian name, such as this is a natural Indian name too. Over here, Indian names. Over here, Indian names. But we also have other names such as Comecrudo, and that's a Spanish name. Well, in order for the Spanish to understand who they were talking about, they didn't want to use these incredibly complex names. So they gave them names that they were able to recognize them more readily. Comecrudos. They only ate raw food. They didn't cook anything. They didn't have fires. Perhaps fires during the winters, maybe, maybe not. But there were some colorful ones, such as the Tortugas, turtles. Anda de caminos, people who journeyed all the time, didn't stay one place. Anda de caminos. Cacalotes, which are, I'm not sure if that's not the turkey, that's some animal. But anyway, that illustrates that the Indian names, the ancient names, but now these are more in the recent times, in the last 500 years, the Spanish gave them new names. So all the old names disappeared. But not all of them, because they have been recorded primarily in the church baptismal records, marriage records. They would actually give the original name as well as they could spell it. And let me give you an example of that. Well, here's a list, well, you can't hardly read it, but this is a list of all the names of groups that I have been able to extract from documented evidence, from books or whatever, and where they were located. and in what time period. From my individual research, when I wanted to see, well, who lived at Sal del Rey, I just enter Sal del Rey and it takes me to an area that they were known, and then I can tell what groups live there and what time period they lived in. And they move around, so it's very difficult to, and that was one of the reasons I wanted to place this type of research handy. All the documentation only gave you names and locations, but they didn't tell you where or what happened to them afterwards, and both of them. When I began putting these together, I could see that where these groups moved at different times and where they were found at different times. But that also has a problem, because sometimes groups had the same names in several areas. These are some of the date references that I've used in the publications. How archaeology works. If you find something that you don't know what it is, or whether it's an artifact, what do? Pick it up, put it in a box, put it in the closet. That information now is lost. And if you die, that's even lost again. So it's important, and I'm going to stress this a little bit only. I'm not going to go very far into it, because I know this is the boring part of a lecture. It's the proper scientific approach. Carefully collect, document, analyze, report, preserve, and I want to hone in on this. If you're out on somebody's property, private property, and you have permission to be on that property, you can pick up whatever you want. It's totally legal. But you cannot pick up items in state, local, federal land. That is against the law. So just be wary. If you're on private property but don't have somebody's permission, that is also against the law. The scientific method. Field work is important, recording evidence, interpretation, and presentation. I'm doing the presentation now. You can use widely accepted forms to document what you found and where you found it. I created my own set. And this is how I document what I find. I use a GPS watch that gives me an exact location, and then I use a program that shows every step that I took in this piece of property, and then it has a little point of where I found artifacts. And then those artifacts I place in a chronological order, and that's what it looks like. The point number, the location, the date, where I was, and what type of tool it was. Simple, doesn't take much time, but that's the only way to preserve what you have found. When I die, this will be available. Actually, it's available now to the university. Every so often, I give them an update. Analysis. So not all material that you pick up are projectile points or arrowheads. And I'd like to give that kind of distinction, and you'll see that in just a minute. An arrowhead is a very specific size, shape, and material. Many other lithic tools, and you saw here so many different kinds of tools. So it's important to be able to distinguish an arrow point by their smaller size. So arrowheads, talk about arrowheads. All right, which of these projectile points are arrowheads? Can somebody point one out to me? Okay, point one out. Go up there and point to it. What's your name, son?
Dimitri.
Oh, good. Which of those do you think is an arrowhead? Wow, you saw that earlier. Unfortunately, no. None of these are arrowheads. These are all projectile points. And I've got an example of what a projectile point would look like on a shaft, like this. Unfortunately, somebody already dropped it and broke the tip of it. So this was used in what is called an atlatl, or a spear thrower. The atlatl was about 5 or 6 feet long, and then it had a shaft. This fit into it, stopped there, and that's the part that would penetrate some animal. And when the animal took off, the shaft would fall off. Then the ancient would come running along, pick up the shaft again, take another one of these, put it in there, throw it again. Okay, throw it again. So as you can see, that's a pretty good size point. It's a pretty good size projectile point. You can't have something that big on a arrow shaft because it's too heavy. All of these are very large, as you can see by their size. Look at this. That one, the one on the left-hand side is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's 2.5 inches long. So this is only about 1.5 or 1.75. All right. So just make that a distinction. These are arrowheads. And look at the size. The largest one down here is only about 1.25 inches. And the smallest one, right there, less than 1 centimeter, about that big. And I've got examples of tiny, tiny arrowheads, but they were used. Well, why were these so small?
Birds.
The bows, exactly. South Texas did not have the long bows that the Plains Indians had or even the Europeans had. They had smaller bows, smaller arrows. The smaller arrow has a smaller shaft. You can only put a small arrowhead on it. And you can see it doesn't even look like an arrow, like an arrowhead. It's a little triangular point. But there's millions of them out here. So that's something most people can't even find. It's hard for me to find them too. They have to just pop out of a sandy area with nothing else around it and go, that doesn't look like it belongs here. Okay, so here's the small one. Yeah, the width is only 1 centimeter. Then the other ones are just a little bit larger than that. But these were used to hunt with. What would they hunt? They would hunt any animal. Any animal could be pierced by one of these, and in the long run, the animal would die. They were more than likely shot at smaller game, but if a larger deer would come up, I bet they wouldn't hesitate to start shooting those small arrows into it. So that's what they look like now. The dart points or the atlatl points, and then the true arrowheads in comparison. And you actually see the difference now? So if you find something like this, don't just say, oh, I found an arrowhead. The proper terminology is it's a projectile point, because you don't know what it is until you come and identify it. That is your atlatl here. Look at the size of this. From there to there. And this is the spear thrower. What did that do? Prior to the bow and arrow, all they could do is have a shaft to throw. Well, a shaft thrown has a certain speed and mass, and it won't go very far. So someone in their brilliant minds decided, what if I can throw this faster by adding a lever arm? By adding something down here that I can extend the reach of my arm and be able to throw something further and with more force. And that became the dart point, and the atlatl.
And handheld trebuchet.
Yeah. And here's the difference between the atlatl point, dart point, a common bow from this area, and the arrows down here. You see that this has a lot more mass to it. It can penetrate further, it can go further, penetrate further, and have a much better kill ratio. And there's the throwing stick down here with the atlatl.
How far will they go?
I've seen demonstrations down at the Palo Alto battlefield when they used to have it at the Palo Alto field. The university would have atlatls there, and students were throwing them, and they would go 150, 200 feet. And after you got hungry, you became accurate with those. Yes?
What kind of wood was used for the bows?
That's the easiest thing for me to say is it's a hardwood, usually ash, or maybe even not ebony, because ebony breaks too easily, but something ironwood. But I've read I've read accounts of different kinds of wood, and it always is just within the area. Here, they would probably use willow, as well as the shafts were willow, because they're primarily straight to begin with. It takes very little to reshape it into a good. Okay, so here's a list of the other stone tools other than projectile points. They're knife cutters, scrapers, adze or celts, gravers, banner stones, perforators, abrasion stones, gouges, hammer stones, gorgets, hand axes, betates, molcajetes, manos, tecolotes, pestles, ornamental items, and probably more than I can possibly imagine. Here are some really interesting ones. Double pointed. It's not even identified. Who knows what it is, what it was used for, or perhaps it's somewhere in a transition zone. They were making something else, or this is a rough item that will be refined later. I have two of those. These came from Laredo. What they were used for? Somebody's guess. Mine, I don't know. Okay. I have hammerstones here. I have scrapers. I have adze. I have perforators. I have abrasion stones, gouges, hammerstones, axes, molcajetes, manos. All of these are on display here for you to see.
Have any of those arrows been found with a axe cut on the backside?
You mean the shaft or the?
No, the ones that you saw, the double pointed.
Not that I know of. But then I don't have that much
If I was doing
expertise.
that,
Yes.
to me it would be easier it'd be easier to just hold the stick, do both sides, and then break it in half, and that way I have two arrows.
That's a good point. But it's quite
It's
thick.
easier to hold,
Yeah.
instead of a little one like.
I'll take that into consideration. That's good. That's a good point. Okay. So let's look at some of these kinds. A lot of items are found like these, and they could have been projectile points, or they could have been made specifically for this. And you'll notice that one side is beveled more than the other side. So this is the cutting edge. That also, and this was actually notched individually. A knife like this is just a point like that, put in a stone or in a handle. And here's another one. It's got that particular shape.
You see how straight the line is on the bottom?
Beg your pardon?
How straight the line is on the bottom of the arrow?
Yes.
That's what I mean.
Okay. To make that. Yep. Scrapers and other tools. Perforators for making holes either in wood, leather, or even in other stones. I have one of these here, and one you can see that. I might have a graver. Other blades. I even have some obsidian blades that came from central Mexico, from the Aztecs here. More blades, scrapers, thumb scrapers, every variety of tool that the ancients must have used on a daily basis to keep themselves alive. One of the interesting things about South Texas is that most of the tribes here or groups were nomadic. They did not have habitats that were built or places where they would live year round. They would move looking with their game, with their food, with the vegetation from place to place. Well, once you start moving like that, you can't carry all your tools. So they would create tools, leave them. Move someplace, they create tools, leave them. And therefore, they're now available to be found. So it wasn't something that they lost. It was they couldn't carry it with them. It was easier to make new tools than it is to carry a bunch of tools with you for hundreds of miles. Gouges, scrapers. Now, quite often when it first started, I thought that these were also projectile points, but the edge is broken differently. It is not made to fit into a shaft. The edge is actually napped or flaked to form a sharp edge to be used for scraping, digging, or molding. Then you have things like these that are round. What were those used for? I have a couple of similar ones here to look at. But all of these were used for day-to-day utilitarian purposes. Abrasion tools. If you had a piece of wood or a piece of antler, you wanted to make a sharp edge, you would abrade it on a piece of sandstone. And what's left are the abrasion marks left by years and years of sharpening. Gorgets. Beads and gorgets. This is a gorget that would be something that would be worn on your neck. Exceptionally rare to find in South Texas. And I happened to find one of the very first trips I went out with other collectors. I co-authored a paper on those gorgets in the Journal of the Southwestern Texas Archaeological Society. Recreating. I love to do recreations. I love to try to put these stone tools to their functional use. So this is how I did that. Getting a scraper like this, which is what that looks like. And it actually looks like a tiny little spoon. But the edge is perfectly rounded and sharp. Creating a hole in a piece of wood, putting it in there, binding it with tree sap, and then wrapping it up to make what might have been a workable tool that they could carry with them. This would be light enough to carry. Hand axes. Hand axes are found everywhere. Mostly they're just ignored. I love to collect them. They are very specifically broken on both sides to make a very interesting edge, very sharp edge. And these are tools that were never carried by them. They broke them, may use them, and then they discarded them. What were they used for? Thoughts are that these were used for breaking bone to get at the marrow on the inside, or they could actually be used for sharpening wood into points. I have quite a few of these for you guys to look at. Manos or grinding stones. South Texas has not had very many finds of grinding stones. I know of only a few that were collected early on, but the manos are found more often, which is the upper part of the grinding process. So they would grind, what would they grind? They would grind grains of all kinds, mesquite, ebony, wild oats, whatever, They would also even grind spices, but corn was certainly abundant in the south, in the area, just wild corn. Grinding stones, petzels, and molcajetes and metates. A lot of you know what a molcajete is or what a metate is because you've seen them everywhere in South Texas. They're used now for grinding the sauces. Well, here's one that is old, and we don't know how old it is, broken, but very deep. What the ancients did, instead of carrying around a molcajete, they would grind into sandstone, make holes, and these are called morteros. Big holes where you could grind food down in there and then dig it out and eat it. I tell you, that would make for some very bad teeth after grinding a lot of sand into your food. You can see how deep these are. That gentleman's arm is almost all the way down into that hole. Okay, so this is what a happy amateur archaeologist looks like. This is everything that he found that day. And you can see the actual projectile points are down here, hand axes, scrapers, other things that may or may not be artifacts, but they look like they've been knapped, worked, reduced.
Was that South Texas?
Yeah, this is over just in Zapata County. All right, that concludes my program. Yep. Thank you. I invite you to come look at these artifacts, and I will try to explain what I think. Oh, wait, we got some questions. Yes.
Do you offer any kind of excursions to do something like this, like maybe amateur excursions or?
I do offer a geologic history of South Texas tour through from McAllen up to Falcon Lake. And I don't offer point hunting, although occasionally the places we stop, points have been found, artifacts have been found, because they're everywhere. We stop alongside of a road near a place that we call Pistol Hill, and just last year, someone found a beautiful, perfect projectile point. One that I had just stepped over probably 20 times before. Yeah. Okay, I'll be out back here if you want to. You want any more explanation on what these rocks were?